Hello and welcome back. I'm glad that you could join us today. We are looking at the book of John, and today we're going to be in chapter 11. There are a series of questions that we didn't ask Jesus, but Jesus asked people in the Bible, and ultimately those questions come to us. And so that's what we're looking at in this series. Chapter 11 is a familiar passage to most of us. It's one that I use a lot whenever I am conducting a graveside service because of the wonderful hope that it gives to us in the resurrection. You'll remember the story. Lazarus is in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. He has grown ill and looks like he is going to die. Word is sent to Jesus to come quickly, but Jesus delays for a few days, and then when he comes, he discovers that Lazarus has already died and has been in the tomb for about 4 days. And then in chapter 21, Martha said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And then in verse 23, Jesus responds, "Your brother will rise again." Well, Martha knew that. She believed in the resurrection. She had studies about the resurrection. It was a part of her culture, part of her faith. This belief in the resurrection began back in the book of Daniel. If you want to check it out, it's in chapter 12, verse 2. This is what it says. "Multitudes who have slept in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt." The Pharisees, the religious leaders, believed in this resurrection of the body, while the Sadducees did not. So Martha's understanding of the resurrection goes back to the Old Testament. It's rooted in those expectations that the final destiny of people will be a time when there will be a resurrection. She was a good Jew. She understood that. She believed that. That was part of her culture and her mind. And she says, I know that he will rise again at the resurrection at the last day. Throughout the book of John, there are a series of phrases where Jesus begins to identify himself, and he does so through the phrase, I am. You're probably familiar with a number of those. I am the bread of life. I am the living bread. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. Well, now Jesus continues that same vein of thought, but this time there's an extra punch to it that we haven't seen in the other passages. Look at verse 26. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me, even though they die, even though they die, and whoever lives believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Jesus is making two claims in this passage. He is claiming that he is both the resurrection and he is also the life. And in doing so, he is claiming that he has sovereignty over the present and also over the future of those who will place their trust in him. He is the one who is the fulfillment of all of Martha's expectations about what would happen at the end of time in this eschatological age. This promise of the resurrection and life go hand in hand. And it's not just some distant event that's going to be way out there in the future. Jesus wants us to know that this kind of life, this resurrected life, is available to us right now, and it's available in him. I don't know if you noticed, let's go back and look at verses 25 or part of 25 and 26. This seems to be kind of the crux or the hinge point of this story, or of these passages. In the last part of 25, Jesus says, anyone who believes in me will live, even though he die. And then in the next verse, whoever lives by believing in me will never die. In that first passage, anyone who believes in me will live, even though they die. He's focusing on the effect of believing. What is the effect of believing that it has on someone's death? Talking about the future. But then when he says, whoever lives by believing in me, they will never die. The focus here is what is the effect that believing has on the believer's life right now? And so the question that he asks is, do you believe? Do you believe that Jesus brings life not only to the hereafter, but also he does so to the present? Do you believe that Jesus really is what we would call a life bringer, and that whatever it is that he touches, death just seems to vanish and life seems to flourish? We've all been to places like Bethany, places where there is the stench of death all about it. In fact, death is everywhere. We have seen or maybe even experienced marriages that have been under strain, and they've cracked and they've split and they've shattered into 100 different pieces, terrible pieces. We've seen starvation happening all around the world in continents like Africa, where millions of people will die because they don't have enough food. We read almost daily in the newspaper about drug addiction and the problems that's an increasing problem in our country and in our nation. And right now, COVID is on the headlines every day. It is a part of our life. And so that sense of a dark cloud hanging over us all of the time, that's what it means to go to Bethany. We live in a world that seems to be surrounded by death, whether it's real physical death or whether it's the death that we might experience over loss and things that we grieve for. And so Lazarus in this story becomes a symbol of a time just like that. Well, Jesus comes onto the scene, and you remember it, I'm sure. Mary and Martha weep openly before Jesus. The neighbors are there, and they have gathered, and they are grieving. Jesus even couldn't restrain himself, and he also begins to cry. Maybe he was touched by the death of his good friend. I think so. Maybe he was touched by the grief of the sisters, or the kind of world that we live in where death is so pervasive and has its grip on us. But Jesus somehow moved beyond his own grief and his own tears, and he spoke to the two sisters, and then he made his way to the tomb. And in a wonderful, miraculous way, he called out Lazarus' name and told him to come out of the tomb, and he did. There are a series of signs in the book of John. We've talked about those, where John will say, this is a sign, and he will explain it. This is the seventh one, and it's the last one. And he wants us to know that Jesus is the one who has the ability and the power to bring life. That where Jesus is, there's always going to be a resurrection, because resurrection is associated with life. Just ask the 10 lepers, who were not much more than people who were the walking dead or the living dead, who lived outside of Jerusalem, and they'll tell you that Jesus' presence meant life. It meant resurrection. Or ask the man in Capernaum who had the withered hand, or the lame man who laid beside the pool of Bethesda, the blind man in Jerusalem who went and washed his eyes and began to see again. Or ask the widow in Nain who had lost her only son, her only means of income and the only part of her family. Or the woman in Tyre who had a hemorrhage of blood. Or even Zacchaeus, who was greedy and who cheated people. Wherever Jesus was, in the midst of those death kind of situations, he brought the resurrection. He brought life. Wherever he is, there is life. And Martha recognized this. She said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. She understood and knew the power that Jesus had. But she revealed a lot more in her response when Jesus asked her, he said, Martha, do you believe that I am the resurrection and the life? And she did. You see, the resurrection isn't just some kind of doctrine that's out there way in the future at some point in time. Jesus brought life to people right now, an abundant and an eternal life. Lazarus, I believe in this story, becomes a symbol of the kind of world that we live in. A world that's dead, sometimes decaying. Martha, I believe, is a symbol of what could happen if we were to answer yes to that question, do you believe? Do we believe this? Do we believe that Jesus is the one who controls our future and our present? Do we believe that he is there in our present and our future? And do we see him as the one who really does give life in every single day that we experience? I'm not so sure that the church has been really good at, after reading all of these words for centuries, that we've done a good job of talking about the abundant life. We're pretty good at talking about the future and the resurrection, and you'll notice that a lot of our songs, a lot of our hymns, gospel songs, especially in the last century, seem to focus strongly on heaven, the fact that we will be rescued from this world, or the desire to be rescued from this world, and then some kind of reward that's waiting for us. Streets of gold, mansions, life without any kind of pain or struggles at all. I have heard it said, it was probably many years ago, and you've probably heard this too, that there are some people who are so heavenly minded that they are no earthly good. And I have met people like that, and you have too. All they look at is what kind of reward is waiting for them, and they can hardly wait to get there, and really don't focus on anything that God has called them to do right now. Jesus never said that life was going to be about escaping hardships. Instead, he gave us a promise. He said, I will be with you in the middle of the hardships. You can see my presence and sense my presence right now. You don't have to wait until you die and get to heaven before you can begin to live. That eternal and abundant life begins now. A.T. Robertson, who was a great New Testament scholar generations ago, said, looking at verse 26, he translated it this way: anyone who believes in me shall not die forever. I like that. Shall not die forever. People who find or who have the kind of confidence that Martha have are people who really can face life and also death with a wonderful sense of confidence. And they can do so knowing that they are not alone. Now, in this story, Lazarus was not resurrected. He was resuscitated. He came back to life, but he will die again. But he did experience the resurrection power of Jesus, who will never die. Lazarus is alive now, and he will live on eternally. That means that we can face the present and also the future without being afraid, and we can be confident. We can even face death with confidence as well. I have been with people who have died or have been in the latter part of their life and just before they died. And I have noticed that there are people who will face death courageously, even confidently, some without fear, some with open and welcoming arms. And I believe they do so because of the fact they could answer this question, do you believe? And they would say yes, and it has changed their life. Dr. Herbert Gorzik was a longtime president of Andover Newton Seminary, and when he retired, he moved to Florida to live out his last years. Somewhere in there, he became very ill, and he was taken to the hospital for the last time. Those last few days of his life had been excruciating as far as pain was concerned, and he was near the end of his life. His pastor came to visit him, and his pastor heard his final words say, and he said, "It is more beautiful than I ever dreamed." And I've seen that in people's face as they've reached out at the point of death, like God has calling them to this wonderful place, a wonderful life, and they want to be a part of it. I want you to peer through the window of this question for a little while. I am the resurrection and the life, abundant life, eternal life. Do you believe this? Take a long, hard look at the life of Jesus. Those who look long enough, I believe, will discover what Martha discovered, and she came to know, that Jesus really is both the resurrection for the future, but he's also life for right now. So when our days are over and this journey finally ends, the wonderful promise is that he will be there also with us. And that is a great promise, one I hope you realize today, and you sense today, and you take comfort in today. I hope you have a great day and a great week, and I look forward to seeing you the next time we're together.